Hey, welcome to the show. I'm Paul Gustafson, and this is Healthy Hypnosis. You know, I'm looking for feedback. We're experimenting with a new intro to the show, as you might have noticed. If you like it, shoot me an email, info@burlingtonhypnosis.com, or if you don't like it. Well, today's going to be a very special episode. This is going to be all about the history of hypnosis. Hypnosis has actually been following along in the coattails of American history, going back a couple hundred years. We have some great footage of some great video put together to give you a run-through the last couple hundred years and how hypnosis has emerged into what it is today. I hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you for a minute or so after the video. Enjoy.
I think it's true that there's the brain, there are neurons firing, and there's the mind. Okay, but regarding the mind itself, we have barely scratched the surface of how it works. What do you mean by creativity? What do you mean by consciousness? What do you mean by self-awareness?
Scientists now understand how much of the brain works inside the skull, but are still trying to discover how the mind can affect the world outside of its casing. In Paris, medical astrologer Franz Anton Mesmer stumbled almost by accident upon hypnosis. At the time, Mesmer was experimenting with magnets as a means of curing illness.
Well, Franz Mesmer would have people sit in a tub, and he used magnets with these tubs, and it was often referred to as anomagnetism, which is interesting because magnets have recycled again today, and medical doctors are using electromagnetism as a way of healing.
Mesmer first believed that the magnets exerted the invisible force of animal magnetism. Later, he thought that the force emanated from within him, and he abandoned the magnets. In actuality, Mesmer had only rediscovered another lost occult art. The first induced hypnotic performance, recorded on papyrus in a British museum, was given at the court of Khufu in Egypt over 5,000 years ago. Later, seers at the Greek oracle of Delphi used self-hypnosis to foresee the future.
Modern hypnosis, as practiced in the United States, begins with Franz Mesmer. But if you go back even further, every culture has a way of going into a trance. It could be using music, it could be using dance, it could be sitting in meditation.
His treatment became popular in the 1770s, and Mesmer's fame quickly spread as scores of patients claimed themselves cured through mesmerism.
He was able to put people in a trance and suggest to them things that were good, like getting better, like healing. He became famous for that, and they actually had to have a committee of scientists, and that was actually Ben Franklin was one of the committee who tried to decide whether anything about this was real or not. They said, well, mesmerism works, but we think it works because of the imagination. Not some other operative principle.
Mesmer was dismissed by many as a quack, but in 1843, London surgeon John Elliotson began using what he called the mesmerizing coma to perform major surgery without pain. Anesthesia had yet to be invented, and Elliotson's technique resulted in more than 300 successful operations. Mesmer's influence was short-lived. With the discovery of ether, hypnosis was once again dismissed by traditional medicine.
So rather than pick up on the idea that our beliefs can help us heal and help us recover, they just discounted the work of Mesmer.
But he had laid the foundation for modern hypnosis, a practice that is now accepted as a form of treatment by the medical establishment. Hypnosis relies on suggestibility, imagination.
Our bodies can't distinguish between a real and imagined experience. For example, there was a recent study done with anger and heart disease. How researchers got people angry is they had them imagine situations that made them angry. And so just as they imagined themselves angry, their body responded as if they were actually had reason, cause to be angry, and there was a change that they were able to identify. But the real beauty of this experiment was the power of the imagination. Our imaginations can make us angry, or our imaginations can make us happy and peaceful. Whether we're angry or whether we're happy is our choice.
An entire field of alternative medicine has developed that utilizes imagining techniques to promote healing.
There are over 22 studies done on visualization and cancer healing. 18 of those studies conclusively shows visualization helps fight cancer.
It's no surprise. Obviously, the brain regulates our bodily functions. So if you could influence the brain, either through meditation, through developing certain frequencies of brain waves, through introducing images and ideas, of course you're going to be able to have an effect on the materiality of disease.
Milton Erickson, the great hypnotherapist, was once asked to help a depressed, possibly suicidal woman in her 60s. Erickson met her at her home, noticing it was dark and depressing. Now, the one thing the woman was able to get excited about was her greenhouse, where she worked with her African violets. She told Dr. Erickson she was suffering from major depression, but Erickson disagreed and said no. It was just that she had isolated herself from people. He suggested she get the newsletter published by the local church. In the newsletter, she was to find announcements of births, illnesses, graduations, engagements, and marriages. He told her to repot cuttings of her African violets and deliver them to the people in these announcements with the appropriate congratulations or condolences. Remarkably, she did as he suggested. At her death, a decade later, the Milwaukee Journal ran a story about her with the headline, "African Violet Queen of Milwaukee Dies, Mourned by Thousands." She'd spent the rest of her life helping others, as a result feeling useful, connected, and fulfilled. So, what was Dr. Erickson's strategy? Well, first of all, he used the sleight of mouth redefine pattern to reframe her existing belief that she was suffering from major depression to an easier to handle belief that she just needed to get out more. Secondly, Erickson found an area in her life where she already felt excited, that is, African violets, and connected that to an activity that would naturally take her out of her isolation.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jeffrey Zeig, and I'm the director of the Milton Erickson Foundation in Phoenix, Arizona. I want to take this opportunity to provide a little background about the person who Milton Erickson was. Certainly there's a lot written about Erickson. There's probably 100 books now that are about Erickson directly, that describe his contributions using various lenses that are on the floor of the philosophical universe. So a lot can be said about who Erickson was as a professional, and certainly by most psychotherapists he's acknowledged as a genius, as one of the people who contributed massively to the lore of psychotherapy, to the technique of psychotherapy, to the practice of psychotherapy. I first met Milton Erickson to talk about who he was as a person. So I first met Milton Erickson in 1973. I had my master's degree. I was a licensed therapist. I was a marriage family counselor in California. And I started studying about hypnosis. And when I started studying about hypnosis, I was fascinated and I asked, what should I read? My supervisor said, well, read this book, Advanced Techniques of Hypnosis and Therapy. It's a book that's no longer in print, but it was the only book that was available about Erickson, because Erickson mostly wrote articles and he didn't write books. There were other people who took his work and turned those articles and thoughts and contributions into books. And I read this book and I was stunned. So I wrote a frivolous postcard to my cousin who was studying nursing in Tucson. I said, Ellen, if you ever go to Phoenix, you have to visit Milton Erickson. This man's a genius. And Ellen wrote me back and she said, Jeff, don't you remember my old roommate, Roxana Erickson? And Ellen and Roxana had spent time together in Mexico, part of their undergraduate education. I had met Ellen and Roxana in 1970, and I couldn't have possibly remembered her last name, but I remembered meeting her, and so I wrote to Dr. Erickson, I wrote to Roxana, I sent a copy of an article that I had written, which was a utilization technique, a technique based in Erickson's work about working with auditory hallucinations of schizophrenic patients. It was the first article that I published, the second article actually that I published professionally. And Erickson wrote back, and I asked him if I could be his student, and Erickson wrote back and said no. And he said, in this personalized letter, he said that his health was rocky and that he really couldn't take any students, and certainly the patients that he was seeing couldn't be used for my education. But he wrote at the end of that letter, when you read my work, don't you don't need to pay attention to the patter, to the techniques, to the wordings, suggestions. The really important thing is motivation for change and the fact that no human being ever fully knows his own capabilities. Now, I was stunned that this genius would write back this personalized letter to an admiring student, so I must have written back and said, okay, I don't need to be your student, can I please visit you? And he wrote back, yes. And so in December of 1973, or November of 1973, I made a trek to Phoenix. And I encountered Erikson. He was a very infirmed, frail man. And he was 72. He turned 73 while I was there. And he was wearing total purple because he was colorblind, and so his family made these purple leisure suits so that they could more easily dress him. He suffered the residuals of polio. And to say that he was quadriplegic would be an exaggeration, but not so much, because he really couldn't use his legs, and his arms were very weak. He could, sometimes to write, he would have to guide his right hand with his left hand, because his left hand was stronger than his right. And his vision was double, his hearing was impaired, he was breathing by virtue of a few intercostal muscles and half a diaphragm, so each breath was labored. And constant chronic pain. His vision was double, his hearing was impaired, and yet he transcended that pain, got outside of himself, and started to talk with me about, not teaching me about psychotherapy, but teaching me about how to enjoy life, how to be a better person. And it was so stunning. If you went to Erikson and you were suffering from pain or you were suffering from limitations, you were talking to a man who had more pain, more limitations than you had, and he was just laughing all the time. And so it was so inspiring. And I remember the second day that I was there, and I saw him painfully just push himself. He could barely do this. He could just push himself off of his wheelchair into his office chair. He flopped into his office chair and then started to talk with me about how to be a better therapist, how to be a better person. I was just so moved. There were tears streaming down my face. I said, you know, Dr. Erikson, you're the most impressive human being I have ever met in my life. And I was so completely congruent. And very quickly, seamlessly, he looked up at me and he said, you know, Jeff, I'm just another old bozo along the path of life. Because he didn't want to be on a pedestal, even one that was made of pure marble. So lots of times when people read about Erikson, it seems that he is this technician and that he is so thoughtful about all of the things that he was doing, and certainly he was. He was a genius about what he did. But more impressive was the genius of how he lived and how he presented this image of being the wounded healer, the person who is deeply wounded but transcends those wounds to be able to help others. And I want to be sure that that aspect of the humanity of who Erikson was is adequately presented, not just the technical genius. Thank you.
It was virtually impossible to stay out of trance around him. I mean, he was just in that space.
He was teaching me about how to enjoy life, how to be a better person.
He was a pioneer way ahead of the scientific studies. And so a pioneer in literally brain growth.
I'd like to have you take your time about going into a trance. I don't want you to go into a trance too soon.
A lot of communication that goes on between people that certainly is below the level of awareness, and I'm sure that's it, but it seemed much more precise and specific communication than that kind of communication allows. So, you know, I know he didn't believe he was psychic, but he seemed psychic sometimes.
It was the psychoanalytic heyday. The hostility directed at anyone doing brief therapy was intense.
Do you always keep a hand up in midair like that? No, I usually. How far are you keeping it up there now? I know. You don't know?
A lot of people came to see him, and every now and then he'd be able to collect somebody who also shared with him that idea that it was fun to learn things.
He looked and he said, "You've got a tendency to over-compartmentalize in your thinking, and it gets in the way of your unconscious. all of a sudden I had this white light, like filled the room.
He always made the most difficult problem a client had and helped them recognize how they can turn it into an opportunity.
He really did trust the unconscious and had complete faith in it.
You focus the patient's attention where it should be focused and where he can call forth memories that he'd long forgotten.
As this teenager who was supposed to die, had polio and listened to a doctor telling his mother the boy's not going to live to see morning. And afterwards having no ability to speak, to move.
Constant chronic pain. His vision was double, his hearing was impaired. You were talking to a man who had more pain, more limitations than you had, and he was just laughing all the time.
He was filled with nature. He was a natural man.
Incredible commitment to truth and to humanity.
It really made me feel really sad that I knew he couldn't, he didn't have the muscles to reach out and hug me. But it was okay.
He looked up at me and he said, Jeff, I'm just another old bozo along the path of life.
Can you hear my voice?
One of the greatest living hypnotists, Dr. Warren McGill.
In the Orient, they make use of a crystal ball. They use it as an object of concentration. They use it as an object of meditation. They don't use the word hypnotism at all. They speak about the astral self, the inner self. The word hypnotism is Western. And they don't even like to be associated with some type, because some of these things are related to, you almost might say, the spiritual powers. Now, Tom, if you will do me a favor and move that table away, over to the side, and over there will be fine. I'm going to show you how the Hindus use the crystal ball. I stand in front of you. Direct your gaze in the crystal. As it moves from side to side, watch it. Think of your body relaxing. That's Western. But now, think of your body becoming all dissolve into itself. The count of 3, close your eyes. 1, 2, 3, eyes closed. Now I want you to learn the power of pretending. Go back to childhood. Remember how you pretended. Maybe you pretended you were Peter Pan and Wendy, cowboys and Indians, cops and robbers. You pretended so strongly that what you pretended became a reality in your life at that time. And so now we're going to learn how to pretend. Pretend your eyes are stuck together. Now move from pretending to believe your eyes are stuck together. And move from belief to actual reality itself. And try to open your eyes. Try as hard as you wish. Use your will. Try with your will. But keep believing that you can open your eyes. You will find it impossible to open your eyes. Now you're going to believe. You're going to pretend. And then we're going to move down into believing and into reality with the things we're going to learn how to do together in this performance of Eastern hypnosis. At the count of 5, you'll come back with me. You'll feel refreshed. And what is important, you'll feel a vitality in your body of pranic energy begin to surge all through every part of yourself. Vitality of life. This is giving you more life, increasing it as you work. At the count of 5, your eyes open. Feel it in your fingertips. It tingles and tingles. 1, 2, eyes opening. 3, 4, 5. Boom. You follow the principles of the East. Let me show you how powerful this is. Come up here. Stand beside here. You, sir, come on up here. Put your hands like this. Grip her one hand over here and one hand on the other on the arm and try to separate the hands. Pull. That's power. That's power. That's power. Watch. Just the breath. Isn't that interesting? Stand right there. Face me. Put your hands up like this. Feel the groin pull you towards me. Step by step, approach till the hands meet in the center. Isn't that nice? Have a seat. Drawing of the inner energies together. Just watch. And down they go. Let go. Let's give them all a nice hand, shall we? Stay right there. Whoa, whoa. Stay right there. I think I will go behind Tom to help me. Oh, I'm all right here, fine. Don't worry. Don't worry about it. You're only using the power of your mind. That's all you're using. You use it all the time. Stiff in the air. Won't move. Stays right there. Stiff. Immediate response. No suggestions. Force. This is Eastern hypnosis. That's nice. Everything nice should be. Go down deeper, deeper. Get relaxed. You feel fine. natural and well and fine. Now you can take your mind, you can make it travel to different places. We are going to travel tonight to this.
And I got to tell you that I had the pleasure of seeing Orman McGill perform. I was a new hypnotist, and it was probably 2003, and it was the National Guild of Hypnotists annual convention. And he was an old man at that point, probably 10 years older than what we saw in that video. And he had the entire crowd in the palm of his hand. You could hear the proverbial pin drop. It was an amazing performance. He was an amazing man, as well as Milton Erickson. And his hypnosis has a fascinating history. And as I keep saying in all of many of the programs, there's a mountain of scientific research that validates its therapeutic benefits. And certainly that's the work that I'm in, is helping people to improve the quality of their lives with mindful meditation, which is really what hypnosis is. I hope you enjoyed the show, and please keep us in mind down the road. We've got some great episodes coming up, and I will see you next time.